The humid Louisiana night of July 14, 1992, thick with the scent of magnolias and marsh water, where the bayou whispers secrets no sane person should hear. A lone fisherman, his boat slicing through the inky waters near Houma, Terrebonne Parish, hooks something that isn't a catfish. It's a human femur, stripped clean, bobbing like a forgotten relic from a nightmare. As he reels it in, the bone catches the moonlight, etched with faint, irregular scratches that look almost deliberate, like the work of a blade wielded in ritualistic frenzy. The air grows heavier, the cicadas fall silent, and in that frozen moment, the fisherman realizes he's not alone. Eyes, cold, unblinking, watch from the shadowed cypress trees lining the bank. This isn't just a grisly find. It's the unraveling thread of a family curse, a bloodline woven from generations of unspeakable hunger, where the line between predator and prey dissolves into something primal, something that defies the very fabric of civilized society. From that bone, pulled from the depths, a cascade of dread unfurls. Fear that coils in your gut like Spanish moss strangling an oak. Intrigue that pulls you deeper into the murk. Empathy for the souls who glimpsed too much. And a horror so profound it lingers like the aftertaste of forbidden fruit. You're standing on the precipice now, peering into a dark tunnel carved by the human psyche's most twisted corridors, where what awaits isn't mere crime, but a psychiatric abyss that questions everything you hold sacred, the sanctity of family, the illusion of control over our innermost drives, the fragile veil separating sanity from savagery. What if the monster isn't lurking in alleys or under beds, but smiling across the dinner table, passing the salt with hands that have known rights no Bible dares name? Behind this femur's silent testimony lies an unexpected twist, a hidden secret buried in medical files yellowed with age, a disturbing truth few have dared exhume, that could shatter your trust in the experts who swear they've mapped the mind's every shadow. Did the authorities bury it to protect the innocent or to shield a system rotten to its core? And what if, in unraveling the Broussard bloodline's enigma, you glimpse echoes of it in your own lineage, in the quiet hungers we all suppress? These questions gnaw like unseen teeth in the fog, unresolved, urging you forward into the unknown, because only by journeying to the end will you grasp how one family's unraveling exposes the raw underbelly of morality's fragility, how the human mind can harbor tempests that erupt without warning, turning kin into something unrecognizable, and how perilously close we all teeter to the edge where survival twists into something profane. It's a reminder, stark and unflinching, that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the default state in a world where evil doesn't announce itself with thunder. It creeps in on the tide, patient and insatiable. Now, in this shared descent, let's forge a bond amid the shadows. Hit that like button, not as a fleeting gesture, but as a beacon, drawing more souls into this revelation, ensuring the Broussard legacy's whispers aren't silenced by indifference. And in the comments below, type these exact words: "I'm ready to discover the truth about this story." By doing so, you're not just engaging, you're etching your name into our circle of truth seekers, those rare few who confront the inexplicable without flinching, building a sanctuary where we dissect the darkness together, one unearthed secret at a time. You've already proven your mettle by tuning in. Bravo, Seeker. You're the vanguard in this quest for what the world pretends doesn't exist. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. The fisherman's trembling hands clutched the femur as he stumbled into the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's office, his story spilling out in jagged fragments under the fluorescent buzz of the station. It was July 15, 1992, and the bone, now sealed in an evidence bag, seemed to pulse with a silent accusation. Sheriff Claude Dupont, a man weathered by decades of bayou mysteries, felt an unfamiliar chill as he examined the scratches, too precise for animal teeth, too erratic for a butcher's blade. The bone wasn't just a relic. It was a summons, pulling him toward a case that would unravel not just a crime, but the very fabric of a community bound by whispers and fear. He dispatched deputies to drag the bayou, their nets pulling up nothing but silt and dread, while the fisherman's tale spread like wildfire through Houma's diners and church pews. The bone, they said, belonged to Marie Laveau, not the famed voodoo queen, but a local girl, a 19-year-old waitress who'd vanished 3 years prior, in the summer of 1989, after her shift at Boudreaux's diner. Her name carried weight. She was the last known descendant of the original Laveau, a lineage steeped in mysticism and shadowed by rumors of rituals that lingered long after the candles burned out. Marie had been a quiet girl, her eyes always scanning the edges of rooms, as if she sensed something others couldn't. She'd lived with her grandmother Estelle in a ramshackle cabin on the bayou's edge, a place locals avoided after dusk. Estelle was known for her readings, tarot cards, and murmured prayers that drew desperate souls seeking answers. But after Marie disappeared, Estelle stopped taking visitors, her cabin's windows shuttered, her voice silenced. Some said she'd cursed the town for failing her granddaughter. Others whispered she knew more than she let on. The sheriff's deputies had questioned her back in '89, but Estelle's answers were cryptic, her gaze distant, as if she saw past the men to something lurking beyond. The case went cold, filed away with other small-town vanishings until the femur surfaced, its scratches whispering of a violence that refused to stay buried. Sheriff DuPont reopened Marie's file, yellowed and sparse, noting the last person to see her alive. Amos Broussard, a wiry man in his 30s who'd lingered at the diner's counter that night, nursing a coffee long after closing. Amos was a Broussard, part of a family that clung to the bayou's fringes, their name synonymous with oddity and unease. The Broussards were reclusive, living in a sprawling, dilapidated estate deep in the wetlands, where the air was thick with secrets and the ground soft with decay. They rarely ventured into town, but when they did, their presence stirred whispers, of strange lights flickering in their windows at midnight, of chants carried on the wind, of livestock vanishing from nearby farms. Amos, the youngest of the clan, was different, charming in a disarming way, his smile too wide, his eyes too still. He'd told deputies in '89 that he'd walked Marie to her car, that she'd driven off alone. No one pressed him further. The Broussards were a family you didn't cross without reason. DuPont drove to the Broussard estate, a labyrinth of moss-draped oaks and sagging porches, to question Amos again. The air felt wrong, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like blood left to rust. Amos greeted him at the gate, his smile unchanged from 3 years prior, but his hands fidgeted, betraying a nervous energy. He claimed no knowledge of the bone, said he hadn't seen Marie since that night, but as DuPont pressed, Amos's mother, Marguerite, emerged from the house, a gaunt woman with eyes like polished obsidian, her voice low and deliberate. "You're digging in places best left alone, Sheriff," she said, her words curling like smoke. She invited him inside, her hospitality laced with warning, and as DuPont stepped over the threshold, he glimpsed a family portrait on the wall, generations of Broussards, their faces eerily similar, as if time hadn't touched them, their eyes all sharing that same unblinking stare. Inside, the house was a museum of decay, dusty furniture, faded tapestries, and a faint hum like a heartbeat, resonating from somewhere deep within. Marguerite offered tea, her movements slow, deliberate, while Amos hovered near a staircase that descended into darkness. DuPont's questions about Marie were met with deflections, stories of her wild spirit, and how she'd always been drawn to the bayou's mysteries. But when he mentioned the bone's scratches, Marguerite's hand froze mid-pour, a flicker of something, fear, recognition, crossing her face before she masked it with a smile. She insisted the Broussards were simple folk, keepers of old traditions, nothing more. Yet as DuPont left, he noticed a locked shed behind the house, its door etched with symbols that mirrored the scratches on the bone, symbols that didn't belong to any voodoo he knew. Back at the station, DuPont ordered a forensic analysis of the bone. The results came swiftly, chilling in their clarity. The femur was human, female, roughly Marie's age, and the scratches weren't random. They were consistent with human teeth, not animal, applied with a precision that suggested intent, perhaps ritual. The lab tech, a young woman new to the parish, whispered a theory she'd heard in town. The Broussards weren't just eccentric. They were cursed, bound to a hunger that defied nature, a legacy tied to the bayou's oldest, darkest tales. DuPont dismissed it as folklore, but as he stared at Marie's faded photo in the file, her eyes seemed to plead for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to find. The bone was a key, but to what kind of lock? And why did the Broussard's name keep surfacing, like a tide refusing to recede? Sheriff DuPont couldn't shake the image of the Broussard estate as he drove back to Houma, under a sky bruised with storm clouds. The symbols on the shed door gnawed at him, their jagged lines echoing the scratches on the femur, as if the bone itself was trying to speak. It was July 17th, 1992, and the bayou seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with an unspoken warning. Back at the station, he spread Marie Laveau's file across his desk, her photo staring up at him, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with a quiet knowing, as if she'd seen the shadow of her fate. The forensic report sat beside it, the words human teeth marks underlined in red ink, a detail that turned his stomach. He needed answers, but the Broussard's evasions and the town's whispers pointed to something deeper than a missing persons case, something that felt like it had roots older than the cypress trees choking the wetlands. Dupont decided to visit Estelle Laveau, Marie's grandmother, hoping her cryptic silence from 3 years ago might crack under the weight of the new evidence. Her cabin sat on a lonely spit of land, accessible only by a narrow dirt path that wound through reeds and mud. As he approached, the air grew colder, despite the summer heat, and the faint hum he'd noticed at the Broussard estate seemed to pulse here too, though softer, like a heartbeat fading. Estelle was outside, tending a small garden of herbs, her hands gnarled but steady. She didn't look surprised to see him, only weary, her eyes carrying the weight of secrets too heavy to speak. "You found her, didn't you?" she said before he could speak, her voice low, almost swallowed by the wind rustling the reeds. When he showed her a sketch of the femur's symbols, her fingers trembled, and she turned away, muttering a prayer in Creole that sounded more like a ward against evil than a plea for peace. Inside the cabin, the walls were lined with shelves of jars, dried herbs, bones, and feathers, relics of a life steeped in voodoo tradition. Estelle sat at a table, her hands folded, and spoke of Marie's last days. She'd been restless, Estelle said, drawn to the bayou at night as if called by something beyond the water's edge. Marie had spoken of dreams, vivid, terrifying visions of a table set with forbidden offerings, of hands reaching from the dark, of a family whose hunger wasn't for food, but for something deeper, something that stained the soul. Estelle had tried to keep her close, teaching her protective rituals, but Marie was curious, her spirit too wild to be tethered. The night she vanished, she'd left the diner with a book under her arm. A journal, Estelle said, one she'd found in the cabin's attic, written in a script no one could read. Estelle hadn't seen it since, but she suspected it held answers to why Marie was drawn to the Broussard. Dupont pressed for more, but Estelle's gaze grew distant, her words turning to warnings. "The Broussards ain't like us," she whispered. "They carry something old, something that don't die. It's in their blood, Sheriff, and it calls to others like it." She refused to say more, only urging him to burn the bone and leave the case be. As he left, she slipped a small charm into his hand, a woven cord with a single bead, black as night. "For protection," she said, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Driving back, the charm felt heavy in his pocket, as if it carried the weight of her fear. Back in town, Dupont learned that the Broussards had a history that stretched beyond Huma's memory. Old parish records dug up by a curious librarian mentioned a Broussard family in the 1800s, tied to disappearances of travelers along the bayou. The stories were vague, dismissed as superstition, but one detail stood out, a ritual described in a priest's journal, where a family offered tributes to the bayou to appease a hunger that wasn't theirs alone. The librarian, nervous, pointed Dupont to a retired doctor, Elias Moreau, who'd treated the Broussards decades ago. Moreau, now in his 70s, lived in a small apartment above a bait shop, his hands shaking as he recounted his encounters. In the 1960s, he'd been called to their estate to treat a child, Amos's older sister, Celeste, who'd fallen into a catatonic state after a family gathering. Her symptoms were bizarre. She muttered about tasting shadows, her pupils dilated as if seeing beyond the room, her body marked with faint scratches like those on the femur. Moreau prescribed sedatives, but Marguerite, the mother, refused them, insisting the family had their own remedies. He never saw Celeste again, but months later he heard she'd been sent to a psychiatric ward in New Orleans, never to return. Moreau's voice dropped as he leaned closer. "They weren't just eccentric, Sheriff. There was something deliberate in their ways, like they were guarding something or feeding it." He mentioned a rumor from his medical school days, a psychiatric study buried in the archives of Tulane University, about a family in Terrebonne Parish whose members showed signs of a shared delusion, a compulsion to consume, not just food, but something intangible, tied to rituals that mimicked ancient practices. The study was incomplete, its author discredited, but Moreau swore it pointed to the Broussard. DuPont left with a lead. The study's author, Dr. Helen Voss, was still alive, living in a nursing home outside Baton Rouge. If anyone could shed light on the Broussard's curse, it was her. As DuPont drove back to the station, the bayou seemed to watch him, its waters reflecting the moon like 1,000 unblinking eyes. The charm in his pocket felt warmer now, almost alive, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Marie's journal, wherever it was, held the key to the Bones message, and to why the Broussard's name clung to this case like damp rot to wood. The symbols, the scratches, the whispers, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture they formed was one he wasn't sure he could bear to see. Sheriff DuPont's truck rattled along the highway toward Baton Rouge. The charm Estelle gave him dangling from the rearview mirror, swaying like a pendulum, counting down to something inevitable. It was July 19th, 1992, and the weight of the Broussard case pressed against his chest, each new clue tightening the knot of unease. The bayou's whispers followed him, not in sound but in the way the air seemed to hum, as if the land itself was complicit in whatever secrets the Broussards guarded. Dr. Helen Voss, the retired psychiatrist who'd once studied a family like the Broussards, was his next lead. If her work held answers, it might illuminate the connection between Marie Laveau's disappearance, the scratched femur, and the unsettling aura of that decaying estate. But as the city skyline rose in the distance, DuPont couldn't shake the feeling that he was chasing a truth that wanted to stay hidden. Voss lived in a modest nursing home, its halls smelling of antiseptic and faded flowers. She was in her late 80s, frail but sharp, her eyes glinting with a clarity that belied her age. Seated in a wheelchair by a window overlooking a wilted garden, she listened as DuPont explained the case. The bone, the symbols, the Broussard's name surfacing like a recurring nightmare. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the arms of her chair, knuckles whitening. "I knew you'd come eventually," she said, her voice low, almost drowned by the hum of the air conditioner. "Not you, specifically, but someone. That family. They don't let go." She gestured for him to sit, her gaze drifting to the window as if seeing something beyond the drooping azaleas. In the 1960s, Voss had been a young psychiatrist at Tulane, fascinated by the intersection of folklore and mental illness. She'd stumbled across a case in Terrebonne Parish, a family, unnamed in her published work, but unmistakably the Broussards, exhibiting what she called collective compulsive behavior. Her study, buried after academic ridicule, described a clan whose members shared a delusion, a belief that their survival depended on feeding the bayou, a ritualistic act she couldn't fully document. The Broussards, she said, weren't just eccentric. They displayed symptoms of a rare shared psychosis, passed down like an heirloom, manifesting in obsessive behaviors that skirted the edge of violence. She'd interviewed Marguerite Broussard's mother, Celeste's grandmother, who spoke of a debt owed to the land, a hunger that demanded more than crops or livestock. The woman's words were vague, cloaked in metaphor, but her eyes, those same unblinking eyes DuPont had seen in the family portrait, haunted Voss for decades. Voss's study had been shut down when a colleague accused her of sensationalism, claiming her work leaned too heavily on local superstition. But she'd kept private notes, hidden in a locked drawer after threats, anonymous handwritten letters warning her to stop digging. One letter, she recalled, was sealed with a symbol like those on the femur, a jagged spiral, crude but deliberate. She'd tried to visit the Broussard estate once in 1965, but was turned away by Marguerite's father, a man whose voice carried a quiet menace that made her skin crawl. Before leaving, she glimpsed a young Marguerite, then a teenager, watching from a window, her face blank but her hands tracing that same spiral in the air as if it were a prayer. Voss never returned, but the family lingered in her mind, a puzzle she couldn't solve without risking her career, or worse. When DuPont showed her a sketch of the femur's markings, Voss's breath caught. "That's it," she whispered, tracing the spiral with a trembling finger. "It's not voodoo, Sheriff, it's older. Something the bayous kept since before the French came. The Broussards, they don't just live on that land. They're bound to it." She spoke of a patient she'd treated in the 1970s, a drifter who'd worked on the Broussard estate and fled after witnessing a gathering in the woods, a circle of family members chanting around a fire, their hands stained with something he couldn't name. The man was admitted to a psychiatric ward, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but Voss believed his fear was real. He described a table set with bones, some animal, some not, and a chant that made his blood feel like it was boiling. He vanished from the ward a week later, leaving behind a single drawing, that same spiral scratched into the wall. Voss warned Dupont to tread carefully. "The Broussards don't act alone," she said. "They're part of something. Whether it's madness or something else, I don't know. But it's in their blood, and it's patient." She handed him a key to a storage unit in New Orleans, where her old notes were kept, urging him to read them but to trust no one. "People protect them," she said. "Not because they want to, but because they're afraid." As he left, she grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "If you find that journal Marie had, burn it. Some truths aren't meant to be read." Back in his truck, Dupont's mind churned. The journal Estelle mentioned, the symbols, the bone, it all pointed to a ritual that transcended mere crime, something that wove the Broussard and Marie together in a tapestry of dread. He drove to New Orleans, the storage unit's address scribbled on a napkin, but as he crossed the parish line, a patrol car's lights flashed behind him. A deputy, one he didn't recognize, approached, his face shadowed by his hat. "Sheriff, you're needed back in Houma," he said, his voice flat. "There's been another find in the bayou." Dupont's gut twisted. The deputy's badge glinted, but his eyes held that same unblinking stare he'd seen at the Broussard estate. As he turned back toward Houma, the charm on his mirror swayed, and he swore he heard a faint hum, like the bayou itself was calling him back. Sheriff Dupont's grip tightened on the steering wheel as the patrol car's lights pulsed in his rearview mirror, casting erratic shadows across the dashboard. The deputy approached with measured steps, his silhouette elongated by the headlights, and as he drew near, Dupont noticed the man's eyes, fixed, unyielding, much like those in the Broussard family portrait. It was July 19th, 1992, evening descending over the highway like a shroud, and the air carried a faint metallic tang, as if the bayou's secrets were seeping into the world beyond. The deputy, whose name tag read LeBlanc, leaned into the window, his voice monotone, devoid of the usual southern drawl. "Sheriff, there's been a development back in Houma. Another bone, pulled from the same stretch of water. You need to head back." Dupont's questions about who found it and why this deputy was out here, miles from the parish, were met with silence, only a slight nod toward the road ahead. As Dupont turned his truck around, the charm from Estelle swung wildly, and he couldn't shake the sense that this interruption wasn't coincidence, but a tether pulling him back into the Broussard's web. Arriving at the bayou's edge under floodlights set up by his team, Dupont found the scene eerily familiar. Deputies milling about, their faces pale in the artificial glow, a small crowd of locals whispering from the tree line. The new find was a radius bone, human, female, bearing similar scratches. Those deliberate, tooth-like marks that spoke of intent rather than accident. It had been snagged by a trapper checking his lines, a man named Remy Thibodeau, who now sat on a log, his hands shaking as he recounted the moment. "It felt wrong, Sheriff," Remy said, his voice barely above a murmur, like the water was giving it up on purpose, like it was waiting. The bone lay on a tarp, its surface etched with that same spiral symbol Voss had identified, a mark that now seemed less like a coincidence and more like a signature. Forensic techs hovered, their whispers confirming what Dupont dreaded. The bone matched Marie's approximate age and build, suggesting it was from the same body, or perhaps another victim tied to the same fate. As the team cataloged the evidence, Dupont's mind raced back to Voss's warnings, the shared psychosis, the rituals, the letters that had silenced her. He questioned LeBlanc, who had followed him back, but the deputy offered little, claiming he'd been on routine patrol when the call came in, yet his presence felt off. LeBlanc wasn't from Houma, transferred in only months ago from a neighboring parish, and his file, Dupont recalled, was sparse. When pressed about how he knew to intercept him so far out, LeBlanc's response was clipped. "Just doing my job, sir." His eyes never wavered, holding that same inscrutable gaze, and as he walked away, Dupont noticed a faint tattoo on his wrist, a small spiral, half hidden by his sleeve. It was enough to send a chill through him. Was LeBlanc connected, or was paranoia creeping in, the bayou's hum infecting his thoughts like it had the Broussards? That night, back at the station, Dupont pored over the bones side by side, their scratches aligning in patterns that formed incomplete spirals. as if each was a fragment of a larger message. He called in a linguist from LSU, Dr. Miriam Hale, who specialized in symbolic languages. Hale arrived the next morning, July 20th, her eyes widening as she examined the photos. "These aren't random," she said, tracing the lines with a gloved finger. "They're akin to petroglyphs from indigenous sites, but twisted, perhaps a creolized form, blending Native American and African influences. The spiral often represents cycles, like life and death or hunger that renews itself." When Dupont mentioned the Broussards, Hale paused, her face clouding. She'd heard rumors during fieldwork in the 1980s. Families in isolated bayou communities practicing altered rituals, where symbols like these marked offerings to maintain balance with the land. But in psychiatric terms, she added, such symbols could anchor a collective delusion, a way for a family to rationalize compulsions that society deemed aberrant. Hale's analysis deepened the mystery. The scratches suggested repetition, as if the act of marking was part of a compulsion, a psychiatric tic passed down through generations. Dupont shared Voss's notes, which he'd retrieved from the storage unit before the interception, pages filled with interviews describing the Broussards' gatherings as therapeutic, a way to quell inner turmoil. One entry detailed a Broussard ancestor in the 1800s, committed to an asylum for unnatural appetites, his ramblings filled with spirals drawn in his own blood. Hale suggested the family might suffer from a genetic predisposition to obsessive disorders, amplified by isolation and folklore, turning benign rituals into something that ensnared outsiders like Marie. "It's not just madness," Hale said. "It's adaptive, a survival mechanism gone awry." Dupont decided to surveil the Broussard estate, parking his truck in the shadows of the oaks that night. The house loomed, its windows flickering with candlelight, and faint chants drifted on the breeze, rhythmic and low like a pulse syncing with the bayou's hum. He spotted figures moving in the yard, Amos, Marguerite, and others he didn't recognize, circling a fire pit where something small burned, its smoke curling in spirals. LeBlanc's car was there too, parked discreetly, confirming Dupont's suspicions. As he watched, a figure detached from the group, Celeste Broussard, Amos's sister, whom Moreau had treated years ago. She moved like a ghost, her steps unsteady, approaching the shed with the etched door. She paused, tracing the symbols, her lips moving silently, as if communing with whatever lay inside. The sight unsettled Dupont. Celeste had been presumed institutionalized, yet here she was, part of the fold. He slipped closer, the charm in his pocket growing warm, almost burning against his skin. From his vantage, he heard Marguerite's voice. "The bayou gives back what we offer, it's the cycle." The words echoed Voss's study, hinting at a delusion where loss was reframed as renewal. But as the fire died, the group dispersed, and Dupont retreated, his mind buzzing with questions. Was LeBlanc a guardian or enthralled? And how did Marie fit? Lured by her own lineage's pull or targeted to feed the family's shadowed needs? The bones were warnings, he realized, not just remnants, but invitations to uncover the bloodline's psychiatric labyrinth, where hunger wasn't physical, but a void in the mind that demanded filling. Sheriff Dupont retreated from the Broussard estate under the cover of night, his truck's engine a low growl that blended with the bayou's ceaseless chorus of frogs and wind. The image of Celeste tracing the shed's symbols burned in his mind, her movements hypnotic as if she were part of a dance older than the oaks themselves. It was July 21st, 1992, and the dawn broke humid and heavy, casting a pallor over Huma that mirrored the dread settling in Dupont's bones. The surveillance had confirmed his worst fears. The family wasn't just hiding. They were active, their rituals a living thread connecting past delusions to present mysteries. But the bones, the chants, the deputy's tattoo, they were fragments. He needed the core, the journal Estelle had mentioned, the one Marie carried the night she vanished. If it held the Broussard's secrets, it could unravel their psychiatric web, exposing how a bloodline's shared madness ensnared the innocent. Back at the station, Dupont gathered his most trusted deputies, those without the unblinking stare, and laid out the plan. No more solo risks. They'd search Estelle's cabin systematically, under the guise of following up on the new bone. As his team fanned out to secure the perimeter, Dupont approached the cabin alone, the charm in his pocket now a constant warmth, like a heartbeat not his own. Estelle was waiting on her porch, rocking slowly, her eyes fixed on the approaching water. She didn't resist when he explained the search. Instead, she handed him a key from around her neck, its teeth worn smooth by years of worry. "It's in the attic," she said, her voice a rasp against the morning mist. "But read it with care, Sheriff. Words like those, they bind you." Her warning hung in the air as he climbed the creaking stairs, the cabin's walls seeming to lean inward, whispering against his shoulders. The attic was a tomb of dust and shadows, lit only by a single grimy skylight. Boxes of faded letters and ritual paraphernalia cluttered the space, but in the corner, beneath a tattered quilt embroidered with spirals, sat a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and stained with what looked like dried marsh water. Marie's handwriting filled its pages, neat at first, then frantic, the ink bleeding where tears had fallen. Dupont sat on the floorboards, the wood groaning under him, and began to read, each entry pulling him deeper into a narrative that blurred the line between diary and confession. The journal opened in spring 1989, Marie describing her life at the diner, the endless shifts, the leering customers, the comfort of Estelle's herbs brewing on the stove. But soon the tone shifted. She'd found the journal in the attic months earlier, its previous owner unknown, filled with sketches of the bayou and cryptic phrases in a mix of French, Creole, and symbols like those on the bones. "It calls to me," she wrote on April 12th. "Not voices, but a pull in my chest, like hunger but for secrets." Her dreams intensified, tables laden with shadowed offerings, a family circling her, their eyes promising belonging if she surrendered. She resisted at first, burning sage as Estelle taught her, but curiosity won. On May 3rd, she ventured to the bayou's edge alone, drawn by lights flickering from the Broussard estate. There she met Amos, charming, attentive, offering her a sip from a flask that tasted of earth and iron. "He says I'm like them," she scribbled, "blood of the old ones." But his smile hides teeth. Entries grew feverish through June. Marie visited the estate twice, lured by Amos's tales of her Laveau ancestry intertwining with the Broussard, a forbidden union in the 1800s that birthed a blessed curse, a psychiatric legacy of visions that granted insight, but demanded tribute. Marguerite welcomed her like a daughter, sharing stories of Celeste's awakening, how the sisters' catatonia lifted after a family rite that quelled the inner void. Marie described gatherings in the shed, not violence but ceremonies of sharing, words, memories, essences poured into a communal vessel, symbolized by bones, etched as talismans. "It's not madness," she wrote on June 22nd. "It's unity. They feed the emptiness together, and it quiets the storm in their minds." Yet doubt crept in. She noted Marguerite's eyes glazing during chants, Amos's hands trembling as he traced spirals on her skin, a compulsion they called marking the cycle. By July 1989, the journal turned desperate. Marie confessed to participating in a minor rite, offering a lock of her hair, feeling a rush of belonging that silenced her lifelong loneliness. But on July 12th, the night before her disappearance, terror overtook her prose. "They want more. Not my body, but my light, the part of me that sees too clearly. The shed holds the truth. Generations of bones not discarded but revered, reminders of those who joined the bloodline fully. Amos says it's salvation, but Estelle's warnings echo. The hunger isn't for flesh. It's for souls, to fill the family's endless psychiatric chasm. I can't leave now, they know my dreams." The final entry, dated July 13th, was a single page of spirals, her handwriting looping into madness. "The bayou takes what it gave. Forgive me." Dupont closed the journal, his hands slick with sweat, the attic spinning slightly. Marie hadn't been a victim of chance. She'd been drawn in, her own latent curiosities mirroring the Broussard's delusions, amplifying them into a shared psychosis that promised community but delivered entrapment. The journal explained the bones, not remnants of harm, but deliberate offerings, marked to symbolize integration into the cycle. But why release them now? A message? A lure? He pocketed the journal, descending to find Estelle packing a small bag. "I'm leaving," she said. "You stirred the nest, Sheriff. They'll come for what's theirs." As she slipped away into the reeds, Dupont radioed his team, but static crackled, interference unnatural in the clear morning. Driving back, the journal beside him, Dupont pieced it together. Marie's entry into the bloodline had been voluntary at first, a psychiatric seduction exploiting her isolation, but realization dawned too late. The family's delusion, rooted in Voss's study as a heritable obsessive disorder, framed consumption not as literal act, but as absorbing essences through rituals, bones as eternal links. Yet the scratches suggested a deeper compulsion, a tic manifesting physically. At the station he photographed every page, but as dusk fell, headlights pierced the windows, LeBlanc's car pulling up slowly. The deputy entered without knocking, his spiral tattoo fully visible now, eyes locked on the journal. "That don't belong to you, Sheriff," he said, voice flat. Dupont's hand went to his gun, but LeBlanc only smiled. That Broussard smile. Time to join the cycle. The station door clicked shut, sealing Dupont in with the truth he'd unearthed, the bayou's hum now deafening in his ears. Sheriff Dupont's fingers brushed the grip of his service revolver as LeBlanc's words hung in the stale air of the station, the deputy's smile stretching unnaturally wide, mirroring the Broussard portraits that now seemed to leer from every shadow in Dupont's mind. It was July 21st, 1992, the clock ticking past 8 p.m., and the fluorescent lights buzzed erratically overhead, casting flickering spirals on the walls that danced like the symbols on Marie's bones. The journal lay open on the desk between them, its final page of looping madness a silent witness to the confrontation. Dupont's heart pounded in sync with the bayou's distant hum, now a roar in his ears, as if the wetlands themselves were converging on this moment. LeBlanc didn't advance. He simply stood, arms loose at his sides, his spiral tattoo pulsing faintly under the skin like a vein alive with intent. "You read it," LeBlanc said, his voice a flat monotone that carried no threat, only inevitability. "Now you understand. The cycle isn't a choice, Sheriff, it's blood." Dupont's mind raced through the journal's revelations, piecing together the psychiatric snare that had claimed Marie and now reached for him. The Broussard's delusion wasn't mere folklore, it was a meticulously woven psychosis, heritable and infectious, where isolation bred a compulsion to integrate outsiders, absorbing their essences through rituals that promised wholeness but delivered eternal bondage. Marie's entries had detailed it all, the family's gatherings as therapeutic catharsis, a way to silence the inner void that Voss had diagnosed as a generational obsessive-compulsive disorder, amplified by centuries of bayou seclusion. But the journal exposed the escalation, how curiosity turned to coercion, how the unmarked bones in the shed represented souls fully surrendered, their scratches a physical echo of the mental marking that bound participants. LeBlanc, Dupont realized, wasn't a corrupt deputy. He was a convert, drawn in during his transfer months ago, his unblinking stare the telltale sign of one whose mind had been reshaped to fit the Bloodline's mold. "You don't have to fight it," LeBlanc continued, stepping closer, his eyes reflecting the journal's ink like mirrors. "Marguerite saw you coming. The bones called you back just like they called Marie. It's not punishment. It's belonging." Dupont's hand steadied on his gun, but his voice came out steady, probing. "How many, LeBlanc? How many journals like this? How many bones in that shed?" The deputy paused, a flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossing his face before the blank mask returned. "Enough to feed the hunger. Started with travelers in the 1800s, then kin who strayed. Celeste. She tried to leave once. The right brought her back." He gestured to the journal. Marie was special. Laveau blood mixed with ours. Stronger visions, deeper quiet. But she saw too much. Wanted out. The bayou decided. Dupont's radio crackled to life, static giving way to his team's voices, confused reports of interference, vehicles stalling near the estate. It was a diversion, he knew, buying time for the family to close the circle. He bolted for the door, shoving past LeBlanc, who didn't resist, only whispered, "You'll come anyway." Outside, the night air was thick, the moon a bloated spiral overhead, and Dupont's truck roared to life as he sped toward the Broussard estate. The journal clutched to his chest like a shield. The road twisted through the wetlands, cypress knees clawing at the undercarriage, and visions from Marie's words assaulted him. The shed as a sanctum of etched relics, Marguerite as high priestess of the delusion, Amos as the charmer who lured with promises of family. The charm from Estelle burned hot in his pocket, a counterpoint to the encroaching hum, grounding him against the psychic pull he now felt, a subtle tug in his thoughts, urging surrender. Arriving at the estate, floodlights from his earlier surveillance still burned, illuminating a scene straight from Marie's nightmares. The family gathered in the yard, a dozen figures in loose white garments, circling the fire pit where embers glowed like eyes. Marguerite stood at the center, her obsidian gaze fixed on DuPont's approaching truck, Amos at her side with Celeste, frail but fervent, clutching a bundle of what looked like fresh reeds. LeBlanc's car pulled up behind, sealing the drive. No weapons, no overt threat, just an open invitation, the air humming with chants that wove into his mind low and insistent. Join. Feed the void. Become whole. DuPont stepped out, gun drawn but lowered, the journal raised like evidence. "This ends tonight," he shouted, his voice cutting through the rhythm. Marie's words, "Your cycle's a prison, not salvation." Voss was right. It's madness, treatable, not eternal. Marguerite's laugh was soft, chilling as she extended a hand. Madness? Child, it's clarity. Our blood carries the Bayou's gift, a hunger for connection that society starves. We take what drifts to us, mark it, make it ours. Marie chose. You will too. The circle tightened, voices rising in unison, and DuPont felt the delusion's edge. A seductive warmth promising to fill the cracks in his own life. The failed marriage, the lonely nights, the doubts that gnawed since his partner's unsolved death years ago. Celeste stepped forward, her voice a whisper from the grave. I fought once. The quiet after. It's peace. She held out the reeds woven into a crown of spirals, and DuPont's vision blurred, memories surfacing unbidden. His own buried longings twisted to fit their narrative. But the charm seared, snapping him back. He fired a warning shot into the air, shattering the chance hold. No more. Chaos erupted, not violence, but a psychic fracture. Family members clutched heads murmuring in confusion, the shared delusion cracking under exposure. Amos lunged for the journal, but DuPont sidestepped, deputies' sirens wailing in the distance, his team breaking through the interference. Marguerite's eyes widened, not in fear but recognition. You can't stop the bloodline, she hissed as cuffs clicked around her wrists. It's in you now. As the estate swarmed with lawmen, DuPont entered the shed, flashlight piercing the dark, shelves of bones, journals stacked like trophies, each etched with spirals, each a testament to minds ensnared. At the center, Marie's full skeleton, reassembled reverently, her skull crowned with reeds, not discarded but elevated, her essence absorbed into their eternal cycle. Dragging Marguerite out, DuPont felt the hum fade, but her words lingered. The Bayou keeps what it takes. Back at the station by dawn, he locked the journal in evidence, but sleep evaded him. Psychiatric teams arrived from New Orleans. Voss herself wheeled in to consult, her eyes gleaming with vindication. You've broken the circle, she said, but fragments remain. Watch for the stare. As the Broussards were processed, one by one, displaying catatonia, muttering spirals, DuPont examined LeBlanc's file, a Broussard cousin, planted to guard the secret. The case was cracking open, but the revelation hit like a tide. Marie's death wasn't murder, but a ritual suicide within the delusion, her bones released as a beacon to draw the next, him. The bloodline's psychiatric hunger wasn't sated. It evolved, seeking new vessels. And in the quiet of his office, DuPont caught his reflection, eyes unblinking, just for a moment. Dawn's light filtered through the blinds of the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office on July 22, 1992, casting elongated shadows that twisted like the spirals etched into the bones now locked in evidence lockers. Sheriff DuPont hadn't slept. The journal's words looped in his mind, Marie's frantic scrawls a haunting echo of the family's chants that still resonated in his skull, faint but persistent, like a melody refusing to fade. The Broussard, Marguerite, Amos, Celeste, and a handful of extended kin, including LeBlanc, sat in separate holding cells, their arrests a fragile victory amid the chaos of the previous night. Psychiatric evaluators from Tulane, summoned urgently by Voss, arrived with clipboards and sedatives, their faces etched with professional detachment, masking the unease of delving into a collective mind fractured by generations of delusion. DuPont watched from the observation room, the charm from Estelle now cool in his pocket, a talisman against the pull he felt creeping at the edges of his thoughts, the seductive whisper of belonging that Marguerite had promised. The evaluations began with Celeste, the most fragile link, her catatonic episodes from the 1960s resurfacing under stress. Dr. Elias Grant, A colleague of Voss's with expertise in familial psychoses sat across from her in the dim interrogation room, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and unspoken dread. Celeste's eyes, once distant, now flickered with a manic clarity as she traced invisible spirals on the table, her fingers moving in rhythmic patterns that mirrored the bone markings. "The cycle speaks through us," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread. "It started with Grand-Mère in the 1800s, visions of the bayou's hunger, a void passed like a heirloom. We feed it with connection, not flesh, but essence. Bones are anchors, reminders of those who complete us." Grant probed gently, referencing Voss's buried study. The shared obsessive disorder, where isolation amplified genetic predispositions into a ritualistic framework, reframing compulsion as communion. Celeste nodded, her gaze locking onto the one-way mirror where Dupont stood. Marie understood. She came willingly, her Laveau blood calling to ours. The journal. It was her initiation. Dupont's stomach twisted. The psychiatric lens sharpened the horror. Not random madness, but a meticulously constructed delusion, adaptive in its cruelty, drawing in those like Marie who sought meaning in their own shadowed heritages. Grant noted Celeste's symptoms, dissociative trances triggered by symbols, a compulsion to mark as a tick to quell anxiety, her catatonia a retreat when the void grew too loud. Sedatives dulled her, but not before she whispered of the shed's contents. Journals spanning decades, each chronicling integrations, drifters, kin, locals, who glimpsed the family's rites and were absorbed, their essences metaphorically consumed through shared visions, bones etched as eternal bonds. "It's peace," Celeste insisted, her voice fading. "The hunger quiets when we unite." And next was Amos, charming even in cuffs, his smile a weapon that had lured Marie. Seated under harsh light, he leaned forward, eyes unblinking, recounting his role with a disarming candor that chilled the evaluators. "I saw her loneliness at the diner," he said, voice smooth as bayou silt. "Like ours. The Bloodline's gift is vision, seeing the emptiness in others, offering to fill it." He described the rituals as therapy, a family tradition born from psychiatric necessity. Ancestors in asylums diagnosed with hereditary mania, their ramblings of bayou debts twisted into ceremonies that provided structure. Voss's notes, now spread on the table, corroborated. Amos exhibited classic signs of narcissistic delusion, using charisma to recruit, his marking a projective identification where he imposed the family's psychosis onto vulnerable minds. When pressed on Marie's fate, Amos's facade cracked briefly. She chose the full cycle. The bones rose to guide the next seeker. "You, Sheriff. Feel it yet? The pull?" Dupont stepped away from the glass, his reflection staring back with eyes that seemed a shade too fixed. The interrogations revealed patterns. Each Broussard displayed variants of the same disorder, obsessive rituals masking deeper schizoid traits, the spiral a mandala for containment, the hunger, a metaphor for emotional voids amplified by inbreeding and folklore. Marguerite, the matriarch, proved the most resilient, her obsidian eyes piercing as she spoke of lineage. "We're not monsters," she declared to Grant and Voss, who observed via video feed. "The bayou chose us. In the 1920s, my father treated the compulsion with gatherings, sharing stories, essences to bind the mind's fractures. Marie's journal proves it. She found strength in us. But under scrutiny, cracks emerged. Marguerite's voice wavered when describing LeBlanc's recruitment, a lost soul transferred to the parish, his isolation making him ripe for the delusion's embrace. "He guards the cycle now," she said, a hint of pride masking fear. LeBlanc's session was brief, his deputy badge revoked, but his stare unbroken. "I was empty before," he confessed, tracing his tattoo. "The family filled me. It's not coercion, it's revelation." Psychiatric tests showed rapid onset, suggestibility turning to full immersion, his mind reshaped in months, a testament to the delusion's infectious nature. As the day wore on, Dupont compiled reports. DNA from the bones confirmed multiple victims over decades, not through overt acts but ritualistic integrations where participants, entranced, surrendered to the void, some through induced trances leading to accidental ends, others vanishing into the bayou's embrace, their remains marked and revered. The family's estate yielded more: hidden chambers with psychiatric relics, asylum discharge papers from the early 1900s, detailing Broussard ancestors committed for compulsive communions, their symptoms eerily prescient. By evening, Voss pulled Dupont aside, her wheelchair creaking in the hallway. "You've exposed it, but containment is key. This isn't just one family. Echoes exist in isolated communities, psychiatric anomalies buried by stigma." She warned of residual effects. The hum in Dupont's ears, the fleeting, unblinking moments in his mirror. Monitor yourself. The delusion lingers, seeking new hosts. As the Broussards were transferred to a secure psychiatric facility in New Orleans, Marguerite's parting words to Dupont echoed, "The bloodline evolves." You'll hear the call again. That night, alone in his office, Dupont opened Marie's journal once more. But a new entry appeared in his mind's eye. Not written, but felt. A spiral pulling him toward the evidence room, where the bones waited, humming softly. He resisted, locking the door, but the charm grew warm again. A reminder that the cycle, though broken, left fragments in the minds it touched, waiting for the next vulnerable soul. Sheriff Dupont leaned against the cold tile wall of the sheriff's office bathroom on July 23, 1992, the fluorescent light humming overhead in a rhythm that echoed the bayou's persistent drone, now a constant companion in the quiet corners of his mind. His reflection in the mirror stared back, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but for a fleeting second they held that unblinking intensity he'd seen in the Broussards, fixed, as if peering into a void only they could fathom. He splashed water on his face, the droplets tracing paths like the spirals in Marie's journal, and shook off the sensation, attributing it to fatigue from the endless hours of coordinating transfers and briefings. The Broussards were en route to the New Orleans Psychiatric Institute, a secure facility where Voss and her team would dissect their shared psychosis. But the case's tendrils clung to Dupont, whispering doubts that the cycle was truly severed. Reports from the estate's deeper search had trickled in. Hidden alcoves beneath the house lined with more journals and etched artifacts, each chronicling how the bloodline's delusion adapted over time, absorbing modern psychiatric language to mask its ancient roots. At the institute, Voss oversaw the initial assessments, her wheelchair positioned in a sterile observation room where monitors displayed the Broussards in individual cells, their behaviors synchronized in eerie harmony, fingers tracing air spirals, lips murmuring chants that synced across screens. Dr. Grant, leading the evaluations, compiled a preliminary diagnosis, a rare form of folia familial, a shared delusional disorder amplified by genetic factors and environmental isolation, where the hunger symbolized an intergenerational trauma response, rituals serving as maladaptive coping mechanisms. Marguerite, isolated in a padded room, spoke through the intercom with a calm that unnerved the staff. "You think walls can contain it?" she asked, her voice crackling like dry reeds. "The void travels in blood, in thoughts. Marie's essence lives on, marked, integrated." Grant noted her resistance to medication. Antipsychotics dulled her speech but not the compulsion, her hands still etching patterns on the floor, a tic that mirrored the bone scratches, now analyzed as somatic expressions of the psychic need to anchor absorbed essences. Amos, in an adjacent cell, exhibited a different facet. His charisma turned inward. He narrated stories to an invisible audience, weaving tales of how the family's rites evolved from 19th century bayou survival tactics, where scarcity bred metaphorical consumptions of community strength, into psychiatric constructs that justified seclusion. "We weren't harming," he insisted during a session, his eyes locking onto the camera as if addressing Dupont directly. "We were healing. Marie's loneliness was the real curse. We offered communion." Psychometric tests revealed high suggestibility in Amos, his role as recruiter a projection of his own unresolved attachments, the delusion providing a framework where vulnerability became power. Celeste, sedated but lucid in bursts, described visions induced by the rituals, hallucinations of merging minds, where participants' traumas dissolved into a collective quiet, a psychiatric illusion of unity that masked deeper dissociations. Her medical history, cross-referenced with Moreau's old notes, showed recurrent episodes triggered by family gatherings, the catatonia a shutdown when the delusion's demands overwhelmed her fragile psyche. LeBlanc, stripped of his uniform and authority, crumbled fastest under evaluation. Transferred to a holding area, he confessed in halting whispers how his recruitment began, a chance encounter with Amos during a routine call to the estate months prior, where a shared flask and stories of belonging chipped at his isolation, a divorced man adrift in a new parish. It started as curiosity, he said, tracing his tattoo absent-mindedly. Then the hum came, filling the empty spaces. Grant diagnosed acute conversion, his mind rapidly adopting the family's schema as a defense against personal voids. The spiral tattoo, a physical manifestation of internalized compulsion. As sessions progressed, patterns emerged. The bloodline's psychosis wasn't static. It mutated, incorporating elements from each integrated soul. Marie's voodoo influences adding symbolic depth, explaining the hybrid markings on her bones. Voss theorized the delusion's resilience stemmed from its adaptive nature, blending folklore with pseudotherapy, making it resistant to standard interventions. Back in Huma, DuPont fielded calls from state officials, the case drawing quiet attention from higher-ups wary of public panic over a cursed family. He revisited the evidence room, where Marie's journal sat sealed, but as he flipped through copies, a chill settled. Faint pencil marks he'd overlooked before, additions in a handwriting not Marie's, perhaps Amos's, extending her spirals into prophecies of renewal. The seeker becomes the guardian, one read, a phrase that mirrored Marguerite's warnings. DuPont's sleep that night was fractured by dreams, bayou waters rising, bones assembling into figures that beckoned him, their eyes his own. Waking in a sweat, he drove to Estelle's abandoned cabin, now cordoned off, searching for remnants of her protective rights. In the attic, amid dust motes dancing in flashlight beams, he found a hidden compartment, a small box of charms identical to his, each inscribed with counter-spirals as if Estelle had prepared for the delusion's spread. A note inside, yellowed but recent, read, "The Laveau blood resists, but yours must fight. Burn the anchors." The act felt ritualistic itself, DuPont gathering the bones from evidence, driving to a remote bayou edge under cover of night, the hum intensifying as he built a small fire. As flames consumed the relics, sparks twisting into spirals, he felt a release, the drone fading to a whisper, but doubt lingered. Reports from the Institute trickled in the next day, July 24th, noting subtle changes in the Broussard. Marguerite smiling during therapy, Amos requesting visitors, Celeste sketching maps of the estate. Grant's update was cautious. They're adapting again, incorporating incarceration into the narrative. Trials as tributes. A breakout attempt was thwarted. LeBlanc caught whispering chants to guards, his influence planting seeds of unease in one officer who later reported fleeting unblinking stares in his mirror. Voss called DuPont personally. "It's not over. The delusion seeks vectors. Watch the community." Those who knew who whispered. In Huma, whispers indeed grew. Locals avoiding the bayou. Fishermen reporting hums in the water. A young waitress at Boudreaux's diner claiming dreams of tables set with shadows. DuPont patrolled the estate, now sealed, but shadows moved in his periphery, echoes of the family's presence. He consulted Voss remotely, her voice strained. "You're the fracture point. Resist the pull or become the next matriarch." As he hung up, his eyes caught the mirror again, unblinking longer this time, the charm in his pocket cooling as if its power waned. The bloodline's psychiatric labyrinth wasn't confined to cells. It seeped into the parish, fragments waiting to reassemble, the cycle pausing but not ending, drawing DuPont deeper into its inexorable whirl. Sheriff DuPont stood at the edge of the bayou on July 25, 1992, the water lapping gently at his boots like fingers testing for weakness, the morning mist curling around him in shapes that teased at spirals before dissolving into the humid air. The charm from Estelle dangled from his neck now, a makeshift amulet against the psychic residue that clung to his thoughts, manifesting in fleeting urges to trace patterns on fogged windows or hum tuneless melodies that echoed the family's chants. The Broussard's transfer to the Institute had brought a fragile peace to Huma, but reports from Voss painted a more insidious picture. The delusion, though contained, had left spores in the parish, subtle shifts in behavior among those peripherally exposed, like the diner waitress dreaming of shadowed gatherings or fishermen avoiding certain waters where the hum seemed loudest. DuPont's own nights were battles, dreams where Marie's journal pages unfurled into living vines, pulling him toward an unseen void, only for the charm's warmth to jolt him awake, heart racing in the pre-dawn quiet. At the Institute, the Broussards adapted with chilling efficiency, their shared psychosis reframing confinement as a new phase of the cycle, a gestation, Marguerite called it during group therapy sessions monitored by Grant and Voss. Isolated yet connected through subtle cues, synchronized breathing patterns observed on cameras, murmured phrases that aligned across cells. The family wove the staff into their narrative, planting seeds of doubt. A nurse reported vivid dreams after handling Celeste's drawings, visions of Bayou rites that promised relief from her own burnout, her eyes briefly unblinking in the break-room mirror. Grant's updates to Dupont were terse. It's viral now in a psychiatric sense. Exposure creates suggestibility, especially in those with latent vulnerabilities. Boss reviewing footage identified micro-expressions in Amos that mimicked hypnotic induction, his stories during sessions laced with metaphors that burrowed into listeners' subconscious, fostering empathy that bordered on adoption of the delusion's framework. Dupont returned to the Broussard estate, now a ghost house under parish seal, its porches sagging like weary shoulders, the shed's door ajar from the raid, symbols faded but still whispering. Accompanied by a small team, he combed the hidden chambers again, unearthing a trove of psychiatric ephemera, letters from 1940s asylums detailing Broussard kin committed for compulsive unification syndromes, their treatments failing as the delusion proved resilient, patients recruiting fellow inmates into mini-circles before discharges. One document, a faded psychologist's report from the 1970s, described the Bloodline's hunger as a metaphorical cannibalism of identities, a defense against generational trauma from Bayou hardships, where absorbing others' strengths quelled inner fragmentation. Marie's integration, the report's echo suggested, was the pinnacle, her Laveau mysticism enriching the rites, making the void's quiet more profound, her bones marked not in malice but as a badge of eternal kinship. As Dupont sifted through the papers, a faint hum rose from the floorboards, vibrating through his soles, and for a moment the room tilted, visions flashing, ancestors circling fires in the 1800s, their eyes unblinking against famine's stare, rituals born from necessity, twisting into compulsion. He steadied himself on a shelf, the charm searing, and radioed for backup, but static answered, echoes of the interference from days prior. Outside, his deputies milled uneasily, one tracing a spiral in the dirt absent-mindedly, his gaze distant. "It's in the land," the man muttered, snapping out of it when Dupont barked an order. The search yielded a final artifact, a locked box in the attic, pried open to reveal a family tree etched on vellum, branches spiraling outward, names of integrated souls like Marie woven in red ink, Laveau intertwined with Broussard in a knot that pulsed under his fingertips. At the base, a notation in Marguerite's hand, "The seeker completes the route." Back in Huma, the community simmered with unrest. Town meetings buzzed with whispers of curses, locals avoiding the diner where Marie worked, its counter now a shrine of unspoken fears. Dupont consulted Estelle remotely. She'd fled to relatives in Baton Rouge, her voice crackling over the phone like dry leaves. "The Bloodline don't die easy," she warned. "Burn the tree, scatter the ashes where water meets salt." Her advice felt like another rite, but Dupont complied that evening, the vellum curling in flames at a brackish inlet, smoke rising in spirals that dissipated slowly, the hum dimming but not vanishing. Voss's call came as embers cooled. Breakthroughs at the Institute, targeted therapy disrupting the shared narrative. Celeste responding first, her catatonia lifting as she recounted the delusion's genesis. A 19th-century Broussard patriarch, traumatized by war, creating rites to bind his fractured family. The compulsion hereditary, amplified by inbreeding and myth. Yet progress was shadowed. Amos escaped briefly during a transfer glitch, found wandering the Institute grounds murmuring invitations to staff before recapture. LeBlanc, under heavy sedation, confessed planting doubts in Dupont's team, his role as guardian extending the cycle's reach. Grant's diagnosis evolved, the psychosis as a mimetic entity, spreading through exposure, resistant to isolation. "We contain it here," Voss assured, "but fragments linger in Huma. You're the sentinel now." Dupont patrolled the bayou that night, the water reflecting stars like unblinking eyes, the charm a steady pulse against his chest. A lone fisherman hailed him, eyes wide. "Heard the hum again, Sheriff. And lights at the old estate." Investigation revealed nothing, but as Dupont drove away, his rearview mirror caught a flicker. His own eyes, unblinking longer than before, the delusion's echo testing his resolve. Weeks blurred into August, the case fading from headlines but etching into the parish's psyche. DuPont monitored symptoms in himself and others. Subtle tics, dreams of unity, countered by Voss's prescribed exercises, grounding rituals that mocked the family's own. The Institute reported stabilization, Marguerite accepting medication, her obsidian gaze softening, Amos's charisma dimmed, Celeste sketching protective symbols instead of spirals. But Marie's journal, now archived, held the final whisper, her essence not lost but diffused, a cautionary thread in the bloodline's unraveling. DuPont stood vigil, the bayou's call a faint murmur, knowing the cycle paused but watched, ready to stir in vulnerable minds, the terrifying truth of the Broussard bloodline, a shadow that time couldn't fully erase. As the humid veil of August 1992 lifted over Terrebonne Parish, Sheriff DuPont stood alone on the bayou's edge, the water's surface now still, reflecting a sky unmarred by the spirals that had haunted his visions. The Broussard bloodline, once a shadowy force weaving through generations like roots burrowing into soft earth, had been exposed, its psychiatric labyrinth laid bare, the collective delusion that masqueraded as salvation now confined to clinical files and whispered case studies. Yet in that quiet aftermath, a profound truth lingered. The human mind, that vast and fragile expanse, harbors depths where hungers are born not from the body, but from the soul's unspoken voids. The Broussards weren't anomalies. They were mirrors, reflecting how isolation and inherited shadows can twist empathy into entrapment, curiosity into compulsion, and family bonds into an inexorable cycle that devours the self. Marie Laveau's fate, drawn into their web by her own lineage's pull, serves as a stark reminder that we all carry latent echoes of such darkness, subtle compulsions, unspoken longings, that, if fed, could unravel the fragile threads holding our sanity intact. What began with a single bone rising from the depths ended not in triumph, but in a sobering vigilance. The bayou's hum may fade, but the mind's whispers endure, urging us to question the boundaries of our own inner worlds, lest we too become guardians of a hidden truth too terrifying to name. You've journeyed through this labyrinth with me, delving into the Broussard bloodline's enigmatic core, confronting the psychiatric shadows that few dare to illuminate. Congratulations, intrepid explorer. You've reached the end, emerging as part of an elite cadre of truth-seekers who refuse to turn away from the abyss. Not everyone possesses the fortitude to stare into such depths, to grapple with the fragility of the human psyche, and the seductive pull of shared delusions that promise belonging at the cost of freedom. You've proven yourself resilient, your curiosity a beacon in the fog, joining those rare souls who understand that true knowledge comes not from surface glances, but from plumbing the inexplicable, even when it stirs unease in the quiet hours. Pat yourself on the back. You're now among the enlightened few who grasp how one family's psychiatric legacy exposes the vulnerabilities we all share, a testament to your bravery in facing the unknown. In this shared revelation, let's forge a deeper connection. Drop into the comments below and type these exact words. This story unveiled the hidden voids in the human mind for me. By sharing that phrase, you're not just commenting. You're signaling to our most devoted followers that you're one of us, a committed seeker who has pierced the veil and emerged transformed. Your words will ripple through our community, identifying you as a pillar among those who chase the obscured truths, building a sanctuary where we exchange insights, theories, and reflections on the enigmatic forces that shape our world. Together we amplify the search, turning individual whispers into a chorus that uncovers what society buries, fostering bonds that transcend the screen and unite us in our quest for the profound and the profane. But our journey doesn't end here. It's imperative that you share this video far and wide, letting its tendrils extend into the lives of others who wander in the dark, unaware of the psychiatric enigmas lurking just beyond perception. Imagine the impact. Each share a thread cast into the void, pulling more souls toward the light of revelation, ensuring that the Broussard bloodline's terrifying truth doesn't fade into oblivion, but awakens minds to the dangers of unchecked mental shadows. By spreading this tale, you become a conduit, allowing the story's essence to integrate into new consciousnesses, much like the family's rites sought to bind essences. Yet here, it's empowerment, not entrapment, that flows. Don't let the bayou's secrets reclaim their silence. Share now and watch as the circle of awareness expands, drawing in those ready to confront the inexplicable. To safeguard your place in this unfolding mystery, subscribe to the channel. Think of it as anchoring yourself to a raft in turbulent waters, where the currents of the strange and sinister threaten to pull you under without warning. Without subscription, you risk drifting away from our unique haven, a community of discerning minds that deciphers the codes of the human psyche's darkest corridors, unraveling enigmas that echo through time like the bayou's eternal hum. Subscribing binds you to us, much like the spirals etched in forgotten bones, but with the promise of illumination rather than illusion, a fellowship where we collectively probe the vulnerabilities of morality, the unpredictability of thought, and the fragile barriers against inner chaos. You're not just a viewer. You're a decipherer, part of an exclusive alliance that thrives on the thrill of the disturbing, ensuring no secret remains buried forever. Keep the flame of your curiosity alight by diving into our other videos, each a portal to new realms of the bizarre and the profound, where psychiatric cases like the Broussards reveal layers of the human condition that challenge and captivate. Whether it's tales of forgotten lineages or minds fractured by unseen forces, our explorations await, ready to stir that innate fascination for the enigmatic that brought you here. Continue watching, and let each story deepen your understanding, keeping the quest alive in your spirit, for in the shadows of these narratives lies the key to perceiving the world and yourself, with eyes wide open to the mysteries that bind us all.